there's some validation that occurs when you're sitting or in a room of other women working in the same field, in agriculture. And, we're talking about things and bouncing ideas off of each other. And it's just that there is some validation that occurs. And then it's also a place to ask questions. Well, how do you guys handle this? I think, today we talked a little bit about the workaholic in all of us. Right. Some of us are more guilty than others, but, sharing those ideas of what that means to you and how do you balance it and how do you manage home and work and pressures and, the phone ringing 24/7 and all of that. So it is very beneficial. I believe that's why I signed up a second time.
Nice.
I wouldn't have done the second time.
So what was your favorite part of Women Ag?
Oh my goodness. That's... part of it's the connections.
Yeah.
I think the first year, one of the things I really enjoyed was the legislative day.
Yeah.
We went to Sacramento.
Yeah.
That was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening and good to meet different people and see that. And it was interesting talking to some of the representatives about their understanding of ag. Mm-hmm. Some of them get it and some of them really don't get it, depending on where they're at in the state. Some parts of the state, they don't have as much ag. And just what they think about it or what their take was on certain bills and things. So that was very interesting. That was one of my favorite ones. And I think this year, for year 2, it's just been a little more like challenging, I guess, ways to think about things, and not having, we're really talking about creativity and that artist within type of thing. And how do I apply that? What does that look like for me? And how can I, still have that creative part of me, but apply it in what I do.
I am Kirti Mutadkar. I'm the CEO and president at United Ag, and I'm here today with Ashli. Ashli is part of my Women Ag Academy. And the reason, Ashli, I invited you today is when you share your story and when you share your journey that you've gone through in agriculture, I always find that extremely inspiring. And more importantly, the things that you learn from it, right? Just listening to you and what you've gone through and how do we get this heard by other people so they can learn from it. And that's the reason you're here. Excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah. So you want to start off, why did you get into agriculture? What was your reason?
I needed a job.
That's a good reason.
Good reason. No, I was finishing my degree at Fresno State in occupational safety and health and wanting to come back to home, which at the time was Santa Cruz County, and kind of looking at the different industries that were there. And at the time, it was pretty much ag or tech. And I don't do well in enclosed indoor spaces, so ag was it. So I was required to do an internship as part of my degree for like a graduate, and I had a connection with a local agricultural company. And so I was able to do my internship there over a winter break. And I knew I'd already loved it because growing around in that area, that was part of what we did. So that was what pretty much opened the door to working in ag.
So what do you do right now? So if I were to introduce you, what is your title? What do you do?
So I am a safety and health manager with ZENITH Insurance, primarily in the ag space. So, right now I manage a group of, I have a team that we go out and we help growers, FLCs, packing houses, coolers with their safety programs. Our whole goal is to make the workplace safer. We also respond when there are major incidents. So we'll go out, we'll do an incident investigation, find out what happened to try to help prevent it from happening again. So I really see it as protecting the agricultural workforce.
So that's really interesting because usually when I do these interviews, right, you have growers, you have general managers of plants and operations in Salinas and Santa Maria and other regions that we serve. This is a different role, right? So when people are thinking of agriculture, especially when somebody is not in agriculture, they think of growers or other things that happen in our industry other than what you do. So can you kind of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's very interesting because like any other industry, you need people that come from all different sides of things, right? So a lot of times when people think of agriculture, they're simply focusing on, a tractor driver, an irrigator, a harvester. Ag companies need all kinds of people. They need the finance people. They need the HR people. They need the IT people. They need marketing. They need customer service. They need safety.
Right.
They need all of those different roles. So it's not just focusing on specifically what people think of when they think about, growing broccoli in the field and what it takes to grow and harvest that. There's so many more options within the agricultural space to grow your career and what you love to do.
Right. So when you think of safety and agriculture, so what is somebody who's new to the industry? Can you explain what that would mean? What is that?
Yeah. So we could be here an hour talking about that specifically. But when you think about agriculture is a high hazard industry.
Mm-hmm.
We know that. We hear about it. We see it on the news. It's along with construction, transportation, high rates of incidents, high rates of fatalities, unfortunately. So when you're thinking about an agricultural operation, you can think of so many things that are hazards for employees. They're working around equipment. They're working at night. They're working in wildfire smoke. They're working with chemicals, with pesticides. It's all these different things. They work with knives when they're harvesting. So they're on ladders up in trees. There's so many hazards
that could go wrong.
Yeah, that they're exposed to in the agricultural space. And so from a safety standpoint, it's looking at those that are inherent to the the operation and saying, okay, how can I mitigate that risk? How can I make it safer for my employees? How can I make it better? How can I prevent this from causing an injury or fatality?
Right. So this is from the agricultural employee standpoint. But when you look at it from the outside and somebody listening in, the reason when you're saying pesticides and chemicals and stuff, ag, right?
Yes.
What we do, health insurance. And our cancer claims have gone up big time.
Mm-hmm.
So I happened to mention this to someone who was not from United Ag or not in agriculture. And they said, of course, yeah, I can see that. And I'm like, what do you mean you can see that? They said, you work in agriculture. There's pesticides, right? And all that. So cancer has to be high. Do you agree with that statement? What do you think?
That's a tough one. I kind of come from, and I'm sure people will disagree, but I come from I think there's more pesticides in the air we breathe in general than in the food we eat. I know growers are, extremely sensitive in the sense of, how much they're applying to their crops. They really are working very hard to use less toxic chemicals. They're working really hard to not spray as often because one, it's expensive.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you have that. And then you have a lot of regulations. You have the trainings that have to go. There's a lot that goes along with that. We have a lot of regulations around it. Ironically, I started my career in pesticide residue research.
Oh.
So that's where I learned a lot about ag.
Right.
I loved it. It gave me a great opportunity to learn about different crops, the growing cycles, all of this. So when an agrochemical receives EPA registration, just know there is a lot that goes behind it. Now, of course, one caveat is sometimes people use it off label or they don't use it according to the label. So,
but most of our growers, right,
Yeah.
do the right thing.
Yeah, because, if the label's saying, apply so much per acre, they want to do that, or maybe even sometimes a little bit less just because it's expensive.
Right.
It's expensive. So
how does that connect with the organic versus the inorganic, that discussion?
That is an excellent question. I love this topic because there's a lot of misconceptions about organic and inorganic, right? So people just think that organic produce is this totally safe, everything's great. Not to knock organic growing. It's great. It definitely has a place. But organic does not mean grown without pesticides, grown without fungicides, grown without fertilizer. It does not mean that. Some people have that misconception. I'm going to go to the farmer's market.
Right.
Commercial organic, you have to use some kind of pesticide, some kind of fungicide. We see that a lot. And also there's that misconception that just because it's organic, it's non-toxic. There are some organic compounds that are extremely toxic. You kind of look at sometimes some of the household poisonings with children are from these organic compounds that parents buy. I think it's safe. I'm going to go to Home Depot, whatever, buy this. It's safe. I'm just going to throw it in my garage or under the sink. Well, little Johnny gets into it.
Right.
And they think, oh, it's organic. It's safe. Well, there's some that are very toxic. And not only are they toxic to humans, but you also think about beneficial insects. And that's a big thing with organic growing too, right? We want to utilize beneficial insects, whether it's a ladybug or bees. That's a big whole separate topic, but we got to be careful with that. It doesn't mean non-toxic. And I think that's one of the big
Just
misconceptions.
being aware of what we, I think it's kind of understanding at a deeper level, right? What exactly are we eating and not believing what we see.
Exactly.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah. And it's not this holy grail of
I know.
no hazard, I guess.
No. That's interesting how we have these narratives in our head, right? About anything. You read something and you form the story in your head. And that seems, as the more I do these podcast interviews, I feel like I'm trying to educate people, to tell them that, yes, you might have heard this way, but learn the other side of it. Maybe believe it or not, but learn what goes on the other side. Do you see that more in agriculture in the life of the couple years that you spent in ag? Do you see that happen more with ag, the perception?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there's such a range of knowledge and understanding, I think. And everyone wants to go to Dr. Google, right? And see what Dr. Google has to say about it. But on any topic, you can find, if you want to prove your point, you're going to find articles and research and information to prove your side of the story. Right. But there's
confirmation biases.
Yeah, there's equally information, research studies on the opposite point as well.
Right.
And some people, I think, it's just, they buy into that, kind of like that myth. It's like, well, understand what it is. Like I said, organic growing is great. There's a great reason for it and purpose for it. But it doesn't mean non-toxic. So it's that, learn it, be open.
Correct.
To doing the research, be open to learning a lot about it. And I think, kind of on a broader perspective, sometimes, ag, like any other industry, has bad actors. But what's get highlighted in the news, in the articles, it's that grower who did this, it's that FLC that did that. And it kind of bashes the industry as a whole when there are a lot of really good growers out there that do really good things and take really good care of their employees. So it's like, it's easy to see the sensationalized news story about, this grower was caught doing whatever.
Right. That makes news, right? If you're doing the right thing, maybe that's not as sexy as that.
And it's really great though when you see articles about people doing the right thing.
Right.
It's like, this is good. This is good. Yes, go ag. Yeah. And it's evolving and it's good. I mean, there are things that are frustrating. I think ag is one of those very highly regulated spaces, especially in this state.
Right.
There's a lot of regulations, a lot of hoops, and it can be very frustrating. And I think sometimes that's where we run into like a little bit of a roadblock, especially with safety, because there's such that push for production, right? We have to get this product.
Right.
There's a time thing. It's not like you're making widgets in a factory, right? We're dealing with the weather, we're dealing with heat, we're dealing with water, we're dealing with labor shortages sometimes. So it's a perishable item. So there's a timetable of getting this, from the ground to the store.
Market.
It's something that they have to contend with. And so some of these regulations can feel very heavy and onerous. And how do I deal with this? So there's parts of it and can be easy to kind of, on the safety side, to kind of want to push away because of time, because of whatever it is. But a lot of those regulations are there for a reason. There's a reason why we have heat illness standards. There's a reason why we have night work standards.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if you can really take that step back, like in ag, and think about, okay, we've got production, we've got quality, we think about food safety, quality, because if your product is not pretty, no one's going to want to eat it, right?
Right.
And we have safety, and we have to balance those three out because if you're spending all your time and all your energy on production, you're going to lose out on safety. You have injuries. It's going to cost you more. You're going to have people out of the workforce. And sometimes those are those news stories that comes up. So there's a cost to all of that.
Right. So do you get employer buy-in when you talk about that? Because do they have to see the numbers side of things?
That's a big part of it. I mean, there's some that are like, yep, absolutely, this is the right thing to do.
Right.
Because my whole premise is that, safety costs you money.
Right.
Either you pay it up front where you can control some of the costs, or you're going to pay after injuries happen, after something significant's happened, and you may not be able to control those costs.
Right.
There's a whole lot of costs that go on after an injury occurs. So when you do sit down and you talk about the numbers, and for most people outside of their payroll, their workers' comp costs are like right there next to payroll as far as expenditures.
Wow, really?
It's up there. Yeah. So, I mean, not for everybody, because some people are doing really good. There's a lot of really good, good growers that have really, they're really good on their safety programs and keeping people from getting injured. And even when they're really good, people still have incidents happen. So I don't want to say, because you're good. It's kind of like I said in the beginning, it's inherent in the industry we're in. Is a hazardous industry. So keeping that in mind, sometimes we have to use those numbers. I had this one grower I was trying to work with really to implement, safety with their supervisors and their foremen, because that's who's out there 24/7 with your crews. The HR person, the safety person, the owner, the managers, they can't be there all the time. So we really rely on that middle management group to really implement and enforce safety. And I won't go into all the details, but they were paying about 200% more than their competitors because of their
practice or whatever they were doing.
Their injuries and their losses and all that kind of stuff. So I sat down with them. I said, okay, they were a strawberry harvester. So I said, how many crates of strawberries? What's your profit margin on a box of strawberries, a crate of strawberries? Right. Well, how many of those do you have to harvest to make up this amount of money? And their eyes got really wide, and they realized, like, for pretty much the first 3 to 4 months of the season, they were almost working for free in the sense that they were making up that much more money in comparison to their competitors. So it's, we're in a competitive market.
Right. And the margins are really
tight. And you see increasing costs. We just talked a little bit today about now we have 5 sick days. Now we have minimum wage going up. A lot of things like that that also bite into that bottom line. So let's do what we can to control some of these other costs.
Right. So do you find yourself more as a teacher than any, because you have to teach them what they need to do so they don't have this cost later on, right? But that's basically what you're doing.
Yeah. Right? And that's what I love about it, right? Because I feel like I'm helping them, whether it's through, education, teaching them like, hey, this is what you're paying and you don't have to.
Right.
And not just so much on that, but it's like, I want them to learn how to keep their workforce safe.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I want their people to go home at the end of the day.
Right.
And that, unfortunately, over my career, I've had to investigate several fatalities. And I hate that. Just the toll, it takes a toll. And it's not just on me personally, but I look at the people at the company. I look at the owners, man, it takes a toll. Yeah. And, those are conversations none of us like having.
Right.
And at the end of the day, someone lost their life at work, and we shouldn't have that expectation. I don't know, expectation is the wrong word, but that thought of, I could go to work and die today. Like, there are certain careers where that is maybe a reasonable thought, but in ag, that shouldn't be it.
Right.
We should be able to send our workforce home at the end of the day, safe and healthy.
Right. So looking at it from a United Ag standpoint, right? And as you're talking through this, I'm thinking from a healthcare standpoint too. It's the more time you spend on the front end side of things, of taking care of things, like basic stuff, right? Your annual exams and this and that and whatever, costs that come up later are that much triple-fold. So there's one human side aspect to it, like you said, right? You're taking care of someone, and there is the money aspect of it. So on both ends, it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. And wellness plays a big factor in, when you think about your overall health of your workforce. So you think about, let's say you have someone who is severely diabetic. If they're not taking care and controlling their diabetes, let's say they do get an injury at work, but now they need surgery, but now they can't have that surgery. It's delayed because their diabetes is out of control. So they need to get that under control before they can have the surgery. So in the meantime, this person is out of work and they're getting paid what we call TTD, or total temporary disability, until they can get that under control. So that wellness factor is huge. It's not, it's people think about it's just personal about me and my health, but it plays a larger factor.
Role. Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Do you find that, and kind of digressing from, maybe this plays into the safety part of it, but does mental health and behavioral health issues are you getting caught up? Or you see that as much? Yeah,
there's, if people may know, like just recently, California new Senate bill came through requiring workplace violence, a plan in place by July 1 of next year, 2024. We know OSHA's been working on that. Cal OSHA's been working on that for quite a time.
Right.
There's a draft in place, but yeah, we've seen it. And unfortunately, one incident I had a deal with where somebody came to the field with the intent to commit self-harm.
Oh.
But the employees who were there at the time, how it affected them, what they saw, what they experienced, the fear. And you think too, we, sounds bad, but at times we're giving our employees weapons. We're giving them harvest knives. You know what I mean? And you think about that.
So
and I've had incidents where two people got into a fight, and next thing you know, that lettuce knife is now used to, harm the other person. So, we think about that mental health, and that's really important in what we do, and being aware of that, and I think there's kind of an old school maybe way of thinking of, not my problem.
Right.
You come into the work and you're here to work and that's all you're going to do. But we come into the workplace as we are with all the stresses and pressures from everything that's in our life, whether it's work or family or whatever it is. And so sometimes we have to, acknowledge that exists. And then how do we deal with that? I don't think we are no longer in a space where we can just ignore the mental health aspect in the workplace.
But the whole person comes in, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So going from there, from looking at what we do from your Women Ag, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you find programs like that help with the stress?
I went through the first year, and this is the second year. The second year program I've done it, and it's been really good. Yes, there's times of stress, of course, when you're like, oh my gosh,
you
I
have to
haven't
do
done
your
my
homework.
reading. I have to do my homework. But there's some validation that occurs when you're sitting or in a room of other women working in the same field, in agriculture. And, we're talking about things and bouncing ideas off of each other. And it's just that there is some validation that occurs. And then it's also a place to ask questions. Well, how do you guys handle this? I think, today we talked a little bit about the workaholic in all of us. Right. Some of us are more guilty than others, but, sharing those ideas of what that means to you and how do you balance it and how do you manage home and work and pressures and, the phone ringing 24/7 and all of that. So it is very beneficial, I believe. That's why I signed up a second time.
Nice.
I wouldn't have done the second time.
So what was your favorite part of Women Ag?
Oh my goodness. That's... part of it's the connections. Yeah. I think the first year, one of the things I really enjoyed was the legislative day.
Yep.
We went to Sacramento. Yeah. That was really eye-opening.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was really eye-opening and good to meet different people and see that. And it was interesting talking to some of the representatives about their understanding of ag. Mm-hmm. Some of them get it and some of them really don't get it, depending on where they're at in the state. Some parts of the state, they don't have as much ag. And just what they think about it or what their take was on certain bills and things. So that was very interesting. That was one of my favorite ones. And I think this year, for year two, it's just been a little more like challenging, I guess, ways to think about things, and not having, I'm going to really talk about creativity and that artist within type of thing. And how do I apply that? What does that look like for me? And how can I, still have that creative part of me, but apply it in what I do. And I think, when I'm training somebody, when I'm training a group of people, like I like to tell those stories about what happened because I want them to learn from somebody, another experience so they don't have to go through it. Right. So I try to be very, I don't want to say creative in my storytelling, but like, hey, this is an example. So I was doing this training one time and we're talking about, wearing your seatbelt on tractors, which is always a controversial topic. I don't know why, but it is. We have to wear our seatbelts in our vehicles. Somehow we think we don't need
like
to wear
it on the tractors.
They don't, there's a lot of it. There's 101 excuses of why they don't want to wear seatbelts on their tractors. So I was talking to a gentleman and, he's sitting in the back of the room and had his hands crossed and kind of giving me one of those glowers. And I've been doing this for, 40 years and I've never had a problem with mine. Never wear my seatbelt. I'm like, okay, I hear you. I see you. Okay. So I asked him, do you have a wife? Yep. Do you have kids? Yep. Grandkids? Yep. I said, okay. So you had an incident on your tractor today at work. It rolled over. You died. I'm just like looking him in his eye. Like, I want to see, I said, so somebody's got to go tell your wife you're not coming home. Someone's got to go tell your daughter you're not going to walk her down the aisle. Someone's got to tell your granddaughter you'll never go to a dance recital again, or your grandson, you'll never see him play football again. How is that going to impact your family? And he just looked at me and I could see the emotions in his eyes. And I was like, okay, I don't want to embarrass him or make him cry in my class, but I wanted him to connect with that.
Right.
It's more than just, I don't want to wear my seatbelt.
Right.
And I can tell you every single serious incident with a tractor or forklift has ended in fatalities because they weren't wearing their seatbelt. It's
That's
just
a
like,
basic stuff.
It's so basic. It's so basic. And I mean, there's, you could pull news stories for all up and down the Salinas Valley of incidents like that happened. And it's just something that doesn't need to happen. So that's kind of, I think, how I try to connect with them. And that you talk about the teaching part and the education part, and then also getting to that heart of it.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Because I think they're not looking at it from that perspective. So you're bringing that out in there.
Yeah.
So when we talked earlier about what is art and what is being creative, this is being super creative, right? This is art. So in a way, when I define art as what we do day in, day out, what I do at United Ag and what you do with what you do, for me, that's art. I think we're creating art. We're being creative. That's how I see it.
Absolutely. Because I mean, you have to be creative in how you communicate. You have to be creative. I mean, we write reports. And in a sense, that's creative writing, right? I'm writing to you and saying, hey, this is what we did during our field observation. This is what we saw. Hey, you're doing these things great. Here's some areas for improvement. So there's art in how you communicate that to somebody, right? Because I always think about that when I'm writing my reports too. I'm like, I don't want it to come down like it's a hammer, like you aren't doing this right. I want to offer it as, here's how maybe we can do it better. Here's a suggestion.
So what is your favorite part of being in this industry?
Oh, I love being outside. That's one of my favorite parts. But, I get to meet a lot of people. I feel like I get to help people. And that's really, what I love about it is being a resource. There's so many people that don't have the time and the energy to try to do some of the research and give me the information and how do I fix this? I might not have all the answers, but I want to say, hey, here's some options. What do you think? And I enjoy that part of that, helping, that teaching, that educating. That's what I really love. And I love that we have such a diversity in California with what we produce. I mean, you go from one end of the state to the other and
it's a totally different world.
And it's totally different. So I love that side of it. And I had mentioned early in my career, just learning about the different crops and the different crop cycles. And I think petal fall in an almond orchard is one of my favorite times. It's so peaceful. If you ever get to, there's just something about it that's just I don't know, there's just a peace in that. So try it.
I should try. I want to try that next time I go on my tour. But one of the things that, as knowing you on a deeper level from Women Ag and knowing who you are, kind of wanting to give back and wanting to serve. And I know maybe you've talked about having your ideal job is kind of doing it for people who are in need. But as you're talking through this, Ashli, I find that you have found a way to do this at what you do today, right? You are giving back. So for you, it's not just a job. It's a job you are giving back on making somebody safe or making sure somebody understands the importance of being safe. And that's a huge service because you are saving lives, I would think.
Oh, thank you.
Right? I mean, that's just listening to you because I know sometimes when we do things, we do it, we take one step and the next step and the next step, but we don't go back and reflect back and say, have I had an impact? And as we reflect back in some of our Women Ag sessions and say, what are we here for? What do we do?
Yeah.
I feel like you are where you need to be. That's how I see it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
that.
And that's, it is hard sometimes to measure that impact, right? Because how do you measure an incident or an injury that didn't happen?
Right.
But no, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Thank
because
you.
you are doing that. And I know, I'm pretty sure as a day-to-day stresses of our work life and you go through that and you're putting off fires and stuff like that, you don't think about that. But that's a big part of what you do because that's super important, especially with what's going on.
Yeah.
So is there anything, if somebody listening to this, let's say from a Women Ag, a leader outside, they want to come into agriculture, or maybe just not Women Ag, somebody from there, but anybody wants to come into agriculture, what would you say to them?
I'd say go for it. No, it's an amazing space to be in. Like anything, it has its struggles and its challenges. sometimes more challenges than others just because of a lot of the regulations we have, but it gives you that chance to be creative and come up with solutions. And man, there's just so many, I would say get to know it too. There's a lot of really great people in this industry, not bashing any other industry, but a lot of really good, solid, salt of the earth people. I mean, we're growing food. I mean, how more basic can you get? Like, it's that what comes out of agriculture is, we feed the world.
Right. So, Ashli, is there anything else you want to add to that you think we missed?
I think we covered a lot. We hit on a lot of different topics today, but thank you for having me. This was fun to sit down and chat with you.
Thank you. This was really, really fun to talk to you. And I know you are a very deep person. And like I said earlier, this is a service that you do. I know we all work because we have to bring food on our table, but some of us are fortunate to do work that actually has impact on people. And you do that, Ashli. What you do is very important. And I know it sometimes might get lost in what you do day to day, but thank you for what you do. And I'm sure all the employers and all the people who work with you are grateful to have you as a partner and educating them. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.